Rainy day today, and I've had it with being covered in mud, so I thought we'd go over, in today's episode, 5 bike setup tips that you need to know. And I've tried to choose things that aren't that obvious when you're just starting out. Number 1 is handlebar rotation. A lot of people will experiment with stem length. People will spend money on different length stems to experiment with, but you can actually change the reach of your bike just by rotating the handlebar. Now, when we measure reach, we measure to the end of the shifter. So you don't really want to be changing the angle of the shifter either if you've already found a comfortable position for it. Ideally, you want to be keeping this part of the control parallel to the ground or tilted slightly up so your hand has something to push against. So if you want to experiment with handlebar rotation, pull the hood back, loosen it off, loosen off at the stem here as well. And then if your goal is to reduce the reach, you want to be pitching the bar forwards so the shifter moves up and essentially towards you. Same goes the other way. If you pitch the bar back, you end up with the shifter on a place on the bar further away from you. Handlebars differ in size and shape and drastically differ in reach as well. So you want to bear that in mind if you have multiple bikes, but it's a fantastic way to experiment with reach without spending any money whatsoever. Also, don't forget there's another hand position on the drop, so that will be influenced too. As soon as you start rotating the bar, that's going to feel different. Over in the Fit Studio, we found you can change your reach to about 20 millimeters just by rotating the bar. So it's a great cost-free way to experiment with your position. Before I move on to the next point, link down below to our dedicated video on handlebars and setup of your bars if you want to hear about it more in depth. Cleat location. Set your cleats as far back on the shoe as they'll go. Now, I'm sure some of you have already found the best cleat location, but if you're a new rider or you haven't really experimented with it and found a good position, starting as far back on the shoe as you can go and in the middle is a fantastic place to begin. The further back you place your cleats on your shoe, the more stable your foot will be. This will mean toe overlap on some bikes. What that means is your front tire, when you're going very slow speed and you're at quite a big steering angle, will touch the front of your foot. This is normal, and you'll almost definitely experience it if you're a smaller rider on a smaller bike. It's worth learning to deal with it and pedal accordingly so you avoid it, because I think the gains in comfort and stability are worth the trade-off. The placement of the holes drilled in cycling shoes vary massively depending on what brand and model of shoe you go for. There are unfortunately brands out there where you just can't get the cleats far back enough, in our opinion. I've been running Lake and Shimano shoes and have had no issues at all getting the cleats as far back as I need them. It's also worth noting that the printed guides on the bottom of shoes are often printed completely wrong. So use a different reference point on the shoe, some part of the moulding, or something consistent in both left and right shoes to get your cleats lined up properly. Don't trust the thing that's printed on there. Ridiculous, I know. But once again, link down below if you want a more in-depth video about just setting up your cleats. Don't put too much air in your tyres. I've banged on about this in videos before. I'm a massive fan of low tyre pressures. Granted, I'm quite a light rider at 65, 66 kilos at the moment, and your perfect tyre pressure will be pretty dependent on how heavy you are. I've just pumped these up to the recommended pressure of 95 psi. These are Hutchinson Fusion 5s. Got 95 psi printed on the side of them, but that's not a target. It's a maximum. These are rock hard. If I went out to ride these, they'd be uncomfortable. I'd have a bone-shaking ride, especially on all the potholes around here, and I wouldn't have much confidence around corners, especially when it's a bit damp. At 66 kilos, I run these at about 65 psi, which is the lower end of the range. Bear in mind these are 30 millimeter, so you might want to go slightly higher pressure if you've got a narrower tyre for the same amount of squish. Scientific term, that. Now, if you're a very performance-focused cyclist and you're interested in the rolling resistance of tyres at different pressures, I'll put a link down below to my friends at Aero Coach who did some testing. In the grand scheme of things, it's a very, very minimal difference, but if you were racing a time trial or a road race that was really important and you want to be saving all the energy you can, then maybe consider adjusting your pressures. But for general road riding, I tend to run them low. Comfort and confidence is what's important to me. One last note here, if you have a track pump with a pressure gauge on it, often they're not very accurate. So consider getting an electronic gauge if you really want to tune your tyre pressures accurately. I have a decent Lezyne pump here. It was showing me 20 psi when I pumped up my mountain bike tyres, and when I used the gauge on it, it was more like 15. So it's a fairly big difference. I'm not sure how it translates when you get to higher pressures, but there you go. Consider a gauge if you want the accuracy. Point number 4, buy and use a torque wrench. Now, I'm a massive hypocrite here because I don't have one with me I can show you. It's over at the studio, and because we're in lockdown, I can't really go and pick it up. In simple terms, a torque wrench measures in Newton meters the force you're applying when you're doing up a bolt. You can get really expensive socket sets, or you can get a really cheap hex key version just to do up most of the major bolts on your bike. When you're out riding fast, you want to have confidence in your bike. And using a torque wrench like this makes it way less likely that your bolts are going to come loose, because you can torque them up exactly to what the manufacturers suggest. Now, I think it's worth investing in a basic torque wrench because it saves you money in the long run as well. I'm speaking from experience here. Over-tightening components can lead to them breaking, especially now everything's made out of carbon fiber. Integrated cockpits are really expensive. I mean, replacing the integrated cockpit on the Wilier back there is about 800 euros, and you could crack the carbon just by over-torquing the bolts. That is an expensive mistake. Pick up a torque wrench for 20 quid and you won't have any of those problems. So particularly useful if you're using carbon components or titanium bolts. I've had aluminium stems with titanium bolts in before, and they can pop quite easily if you over-torque them by a couple of Newton meters. So consider a torque wrench. It'll save you money in the long run. What is this mysterious clear liquid, I hear you ask? I guess this might not be considered bike setup, but it's a really handy tip related to bike maintenance that I always use. Clean your brake surfaces with isopropyl alcohol. Now this applies to disc and rim brakes. At this time of year, your bikes get covered in shit. There's oil, salt, and grit on the roads. If you're on the mountain bike trails, naturally you're gonna get covered in mud anyway. Keeping your brakes clean is vital in terms of performance and safety. Instead of using disc brake cleaner, which can be quite expensive, I use isopropyl alcohol, which is 99.9% pure alcohol. You can buy a litre like this off Amazon for about £8, and it will last you a long time. This is completely safe to use on your brakes, and any excess will just evaporate. You can't use a lot of degreasers that you'd use on the rest of your bike on your brakes because they often leave behind a residue. For example, GT85 leaves a very thin lubricant, so if you ended up with that on your brakes, they would just stop working. So you have to be careful what you use. Now with this, a little goes a long way. I tip it upside down onto a completely clean rag because you don't want to be contaminating the brakes with anything else. So ideally a rag that's been through the wash. Then I use it to rub over my disc rotors, get all of the grime off, and keep repeating until they're shiny and clean. The same goes for rim brakes. You should see the dirt come off onto the rag. This stuff is pretty aggressive, so you're going to see a big difference. Doing this regularly will improve your stopping power, rate of wear, and slow down the process of your pads getting contaminated too. So it's going to save you money for the price of £8. It's also quite handy for getting little grease marks off your frame and stuff, but don't use it on your drivetrain because it will just strip out all the grease that's on there. That marks the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. A style I haven't touched on in a while, but as we're back in lockdown, I thought it might be appropriate to share some tips and hopefully help some newer riders. Please put a comment down below if you have any bike setup or maintenance tips, especially as we're coming into winter and we want to get the most out of our gear. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys soon. Oh.